Chapter 17.
"He's a big-mouthed liar,"
Ezra exclaimed angrily to the sheriff in refutation of Jeff Cadry's statement that Pat Stevens was not Pat Stevens.
"He's one of the outlaws his own self, tied up with that Deputy Clarence Adams. Don't believe a word he says, Sheriff."
The sheriff frowned, shaking his head. "What do you mean, an outlaw mixed up with Deputy Adams?"
"I forgot you don't know what's going on. Why, sure, Sheriff. This Scarface and Adams are in cahoots with the Lacy gang, four of which," Ezra added grimly, "are tied in them horses back there."
The crowd of armed posse men were pressing closer and closer upon Ezra and Cadry, drinking in every word without understanding, knowing only that it was drama-full moment of their humdrum life. Cadry showed his teeth in a sadistic snarl. "The man's crazy," he ejected. "Who's going to believe such a charge? We all know Adams is honest as the day is long." He was a shrewd antagonist, shifting the attentions of the crowd to Adams, whom they all knew, and away from himself. Sheriff Petrillo nodded, and then he muttered, "Deputy Adams is a good man. Without proof, I cannot believe what you say, but this man is wounded." He strode towards Pat, who was laying on the ground unconscious. "And while we stand here talking, he may die. If he is Pat Stevens, or if he is an outlaw, he still requires a doctor's attention." "That's right," Cadry grinned. "Save him to hang later." He leaned over and picked up Pat on the arms, and saying, "I'll just carry him across to the sawbones over yonder on the other side of the square." Ezra took a step forward to stop him, bellowing, "Don't you be touching Pat. Figuring on slipping a knife into his ribs, I reckon." Strong hands grabbed Ezra and held him back. The sheriff warned sharply, "Not so fast, my big one. You are one, from your description, who we hunted long tonight after the shooting here. You're under arrest until we find out what is true and what is false."
"And in the meantime, that Lacy outlaw will be finishing off Pat Stevens with no one to stop him,"
Ezra yelled. He lunged forward, dragging half a dozen men with him, flailing out furiously with both huge fists like a maddened bull elephant. Men went down into the street and were trampled underfoot before the big man was finally subdued by the sheer weight of numbers. When the melee was ended, Sheriff Petrillo emerged from it panting and with one of the sleeves of his shirt torn from his body. "Gracious," he muttered in awe. "This one is strong like 6 bulls. We'll take him to the jail, and you, Thomas, to the Dr. Drago at once, and see that nothing happens to the other one. This Jeff Cadry is one I know not about either."
"Let me go to Pat,"
Ezra pleaded with the sheriff, when the order was restored and his big hands were securely tussled behind him.
"Come with me to the doctor's office, so I can prove he's Pat Stevens like I say. He's got papers in his pocket. It won't hurt you to take a look."
The sheriff hesitated and rubbed his chin dubiously. "None of this I like so good. If he is Pat Stevens from Powder Valley, like you say—"
"He is! I swear he is! I'm from Powder Valley, too. Pat, he's an old friend of Mose Higgins, and Mose writ him a letter saying he was in trouble, needed help. I bet you Pat's got that very letter in his pocket right now."
"It won't be wrong to take a peek," the sheriff agreed cautiously. "Come with me, 3 of you, and see to this crazy man doesn't break his ropes and make a wreck out of Santa Lucia. We'll see what this man has in his pockets." In silence, the procession trailed across the square to a neat 1-story adobe house with a polished brass sign over the door which indicated it was the domicile of Dr. Ezekiel Drago, M.D. A trim young girl answered the sheriff's knock on the door, and she led them back into a corridor to the doctor's reception room and office in the rear. Jeff Cadry and the man whom Petrillo had sent along with them were in the reception room. Cadry greeted their entrance with a smile. "The doc's in there cutting 'em up now," he announced. "I reckon there won't be much left of 'em when the doctor gets through." Petrillo ordered Ezra's guards to remain with their prisoner in the reception room, and he went into the doctor's office alone. Ezra stood in the corner of the floor with his hands bound behind him and glaring at Kadri with his single eye. "Your time's comin'," he warned the scar-faced man. "So as the sheriff goes through Pat's pockets and finds out that I've told the truth, your goose is cooked. Not many of your gang left now, is there?" Kadri smiled slyly and deftly rolled a cigarette. "Well, you got the heft of a stretch rope nice and tight," he mused, with smoke curling up past his scarred cheek. "I'd admire to be pulling on the other end myself." Sheriff Petrillo came out from the doctor's office before Ezra could reply, and Ezra swung towards him and asked eagerly, How is he, Sheriff? He'll pull through, I reckon." "Pull through?" The Spanish sheriff looked surprised, and then his face cleared. "Why, yes, that is American slang. He'll be well quickly, but Dr. Drago says he's lost much blood and will be weak." He paused and then added bluntly, "There was nothing in his pockets to show that he is the man you say. Nothing in his pockets, no letter, nada." He spread out his hands in a Latin gesture of indifference. "Well, it's to the jail for you, my friend with one eye." For a moment, Ezra stood speechless with consternation. He didn't know Pat had brought Mose Higgins' letter with him, but he had felt absolutely positive that Pat would have some paper of identification upon his body. He started to protest, but his guards were effectively bustling him out of the corridor and towards the front door. As they reached the outer air, they were intercepted by a tall man dressed in store clothes, wearing eyeglasses and a white goatee. He stopped them with an air of authority and demanded, "Where's the man who calls himself Pat Stevens? I must see to him at once." Petrillo pushed past the others. "Good morning, Signor Tom Leroy," he said politely. "I think the man who calls himself Pat Stevens is someone else." "And what makes you say that?" demanded the county political czar. "Well, he doesn't have the papers of identification." "Well, let me see him and talk to him. I can tell soon enough. Mose Higgins told me how he met him years ago. I can check up by asking him a few questions." The sheriff spread out his hands again. "I think it best that no one talk to him for many hours. The doctor has put him under the gas that smells bad." Leroy humphed loudly and caressed his goatee. Ezra lunged forward to confront him. "I'm Pat Stevens' partner from Powder Valley," he said loudly. "What do you want with him?" Tom Leroy looked at him coldly. "My business with Mr. Stevens concerns a certain private document placed in my hands several months ago by Mose Higgins to be turned over to Stevens in case of Mose's death. And I've heard that Mose has been murdered, and so—" He shrugged his thin, erect shoulders. "Well, you better give me that document," Ezra urged. "It's needed right this moment to clean the Jim Lacy gang out of this town. I'm telling you right now, we can't afford to lose no more time. Maybe it'll fix everything right up." "I'm quite sorry," said Tom Leroy. "That's what I wanted to tell Stevens. As soon as I heard of Mose's death, I went to my safe where I had the sealed envelope and found it was gone. Vanished. My safe had been robbed." He vented himself a deep, troubled sigh. And at that moment a trio of riders loped up the street outside. They pulled their horses to a stop when they saw the crowd gathering on the doctor's front porch, and Ezra let out a whoop of joy when he saw Sam Salone, Helen Higgins, and Ben Andrews. He bellowed, "Hey, come here, Sam, and come a-running." Sam slid off and hurried towards him, followed by Ben and Helen. In a few words, Ezra explained his predicament to Sam while the sheriff and the others stood by and let him talk, listening carefully, while they sought to determine for themselves whether the two were who they claimed to be or were actually members of the dreaded Jim Lacy gang.
"And then this Tom Leroy here," Ezra ended angrily, "claims Mose left him a sealed envelope to be handed to Pat if he died before Pat got here, but the letter's done gotten stolen from his safe. Now nobody knows nothing."
"Tom Leroy?" exclaimed Ben Andrews. "Well, that's funny. Ned Leroy was just out at Higgins Ranch with Ned Ledbetter and Clarence Adams. They all went off together and said something about exploring the old passage to Lonesome Creek that the Lacy gang used years about while they were robbing stages hereabout."
Out of the corner of his eyes, Sam Sloane caught a glimpse of a figure slipping away from the edge of the crowd. It was Jeff Cadry, and the jagged scar on his face showed livid and angry against a background that was white with fury.
"Hold on there!"
Sam shouted. He flung himself across Cadry and was met by a snarled curse and two guns drawn swiftly against him. Unarmed, Sam flung himself into the dust at Cadry's feet, knocking the gunman to the ground. And at the same instant, Ezra tore himself from the lax grasp of the men who held him and plowed through the throng. He launched himself through the air like a battering ram, his full weight landing atop the gunman and knocking all the fight out of him. Sam leapt to his feet and confronted the muzzles of a half-dozen guns. He waved them aside, shouting angrily,
"Don't be fools! You've got us too and Pat if you want us. We don't mind, but don't you see that you're playing into Lacy's hands if you're wasting time here in town? There's something about that entranceway that's important. I don't know what it is, but I aim to find out if you fellers will go with me. Don't you see how it all ties together? Helen and Ben were telling me on the way about an argument between Nate Ledbetter and Adams were having. Nate and Ned Leroy came to the ranch together. They're all in it some way. That sealed envelope of Moe's disappearing from Leroy's safe. Well, how about that, Mr. Leroy? How many people can get into your safe?"
"Why, I had the combination, and Ned—"
"Well, there you are. Stands to reason he grabbed the letter the minute he knowed Moses was done for. Nate put him up to it, I reckon. I done heard that you kicked the boy out, and he's gone sort of wild."
Leroy hung his head for a moment.
"Yes," he muttered. "Nate has been hanging around with Ned Ledbetter and doing some gambling, and he owes Nate a lot of money."
"Well, there you are," Sam pointed out. "So Nate knows that Moses knows something, and he knows it's in that letter that you put away for Mose. And he's talking your boy into grabbing it." He stopped and made a savage gesture. "To hell with all this talking. We better get back to Lonesome Creek and the ranch."
He whirled and drew out a clasp knife and slashed the bonds holding Ezra's wrists behind him, and so completely did Sam Sloane dominate the situation that no one thought to protest.
"Someone take Cadry's guns," snapped Sam, taking full charge now. "Ezra and me, we'll go unarmed. We ain't afraid of what you'll find out, but just to prove I'm betting is true, keep setting on top of him, Ezra."
He knelt beside Jeff Cadry, who was still withering ineffectually under Ezra's weight, and swiftly began going through his pockets. In a moment he stood up, triumphantly waving a sheaf of papers.
"Well, here's the stuff he stole out of Pat's pockets while he brought him over to the doctor's office. The letter from Mose and everything. Now will you fools begin to believe what I'm telling you? With Cadry here, we got the rest of the Lacy gang trapped out yonder in Lonesome Creek. If some of you goes up the creek and some goes by the ranch way, we'll close in on the passageway on both ends."
In the midst of a lot of excited questioning, Sam swiftly told about the passageway between the outlaws' hangout in Lonesome Creek and the Higgins Ranch, and by the time he finished, he had the sheriff and entire crowd in perfect agreement with him on his plan of action. It didn't take long for horses to gallop directly to the Higgins Ranch with the main body, while another party was dispatched to cover the lower end of the Lonesome Creek. Without their guns and surrounded by armed men, Sam Salone, Ezra, and Jeff Cadry were all held as virtual hostages until the true facts of the case became known and the puzzled sheriff could define and decide who was an outlaw and who was an honest man. When the party thundered up the upper outlet of the passageway and Sam pointed to the simple manner of concealment, the sheriff immediately ordered several of the men to gather dried stems of yucca plants to be lit and used as torches to light the underground channel, and with Sam as a guide, he led the posse on foot downward through the narrow way. The flickering light of the yucca lit the smooth rock walls in front of them. There was absolute silence, not a sound to indicate that Sam was correct in his belief that there was some secret here, which the three men had intended to search out while they left the ranch so hurriedly. But when they reached the inner room, about halfway between the entrances, a gruesome and bloody sight greeted the lights of the torches. The first body they came upon was that of Clarence Adams. He lay flat on his back, and his sightless eyes staring up into Sheriff Petrillo's face. He was dead, with a well-placed bullet through his heart. 10 feet beyond him was the cadaverous body of the gambler, Nate Ledbetter, a hideous sight now with half his thin face shot away. A low moan drew the sheriff on to Ned Leroy, who lay outstretched on his belly in one dim corner of the small chamber. His arms were outstretched around 2 heavy leather bags as though he was gathering the precious objects to his bosom as his last gesture of consciousness gave way. The sheriff gave a start of astonishment as he rolled the young man over gently. "Them's be old Wells Fargo money pouches," he muttered. "I'm guessing it was something like that. The loot from the Lacy stage robbery, it was cached here all those years with only Mose Higgins knowing about it. How bad's the boy hurt?" "Oh, my son, my boy," came a sobbing quaver from stern old Tom Leroy's throat as he knelt beside the boy who had been led astray by gambling and bad companions. "Oh, if only you could speak to me, son." "Dad?" The single syllable was a gargle from the dying boy. He strove to open his eyes, murmuring weakly, "It's awfully dark, isn't it?" "Oh, tell us the truth, Ned," begged his father. "Quickly, before you die. It's the least you can do now." "Nate. It was Nate's idea. He was one of the old Lacy gang, he and Mose, and he made me steal that letter from your safe, and we read it this morning. It told everything. I don't know how Clarence knew, but it was Clarence that killed Moses last night. The letter said that Moses was the only one in the gang that knew Lacy by sight. A scarred-faced man named Jeff Cadry." The lad's voice faded as life ebbed from his body, and his father lifted a white, strained face, but there was a lilt of pride in his voice as he said simply to Sheriff Petrillo, "Well, I'm glad that Ned came through in the end. That ends the 10-state search for Jim Lacy, and it exonerates these Powder Valley men who have accomplished overnight what the lawmen of Southwest have been unable to accomplish over a period of years." Ezra surged backwards and glaring fretfully at Sam with his one eye. "I don't know whether I like that or not," he whispered hoarsely. What's exonerate, Sam? Is that good or bad?"
"I don't know," Sam confessed comfortably. "We'll put her up to Pat soon as he can set up and take notice. And if it's that kind of cuss word I suspect it is, we'll make Tom Leroy take her back and wash his mouth out with soap to boot."
End of Chapter 17 and end of Trail South by Peter Field. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of another one of Pat Stevens' stories by Peter Field. I don't really know for sure, but I kind of wonder if this may be one of an early novels that was written as Peter Field is beginning to flesh out how he views the characters and their backstories and where they fit together. Must say it's old Ezra and Sam have a little bit of a comedical bone in their body. So I'll be starting another one shortly, so that's don't be worried about that. I'm quite enjoying this author. It's been kind of interesting that I've never actually stumbled upon him before, but I don't know. I quite like him. He has a certain artistic flow to his work and branching out different that one instance where Pat Stevens and Ezra go to town in one chapter at the end here, and he makes the point of the rising sun as a timeline that we can all relate to, and then circles back in the next chapter, fills in that story, and then the rising sun again, and then you kind of have a touchstone of where you are on the timeline. I like that. He does it multiple times in multiple books. I quite like how he does that. It's kind of a neat little brush of artistic pen. Anyways, I'm yammering and being annoying. So, anyways, thank you to everyone who's loyal with the thumbs ups. Those really do make a big difference. They what those do is they show that you enjoyed the experience and that you're willing to go through the effort of pushing the thumbs up button. So then YouTube will say, hey, people actually like what they're listening to, and then share it to people that haven't yet stumbled upon us. And then commenting, that just shows that you obviously care enough to interact with the channel and voice your thoughts, and because that's what the computers of YouTube they want people to be interested in the content, and then that shows that it's good content, and then they'll promote it to other people. To all those of our members who have joined the family, thank you. Those mean a lot. They truly do. And anyone who's wanted to give a small donation through a super chat to help support the farm and channel, that's greatly appreciated as well. So thank you for all those kind thoughts. Anyways, I've rambled on long enough. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, we'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.